Name, but I've been in the space for a little while. Today I want to talk, I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to get too technical. I'm going to save it for the questions afterwards. Hopefully that we'll give enough of a high-level overview that you can ask some questions and I can give you directions. I want you to think about these things as keywords because there's not nearly enough time in the day to tell you all the things that are possible with Bitcoin. So, I am one of those toxic Bitcoin maximalists, per se. Now, this is a name, actually, that Mr. Vitalik Buterin decided to hand out as sort of a pejorative to kind of make fun of people like me. But ultimately, I want to talk to you about how I think sound money forms a foundation for the real economic future. Seems like a lot of the conversation today kind of touches on this, but I want to dive into it in a little bit more detail. So just kind of give you some background as to how I got into this space. I started originally with Occupy Wall Street. I was sort of a Ron Paul fan very early on. Decided that, you know, I really didn't like the direction that I saw things going. And so I started to help participate, organize Occupy Wall Street all the way back in the summer of 2011. Through that process, I learned a lot of lessons, a lot of results of what when you try to make a change and you're going up against just something so big, you really have to prepare and be aware of just the size of that challenge. I went on to work at BitPay after that. This is what really caused me to take a second look at the Bitcoin white paper. It had already come across my radar and my tech sphere, and I honestly didn't quite get it. I didn't connect the dots between the economic aspects of things and the technological aspect of things. But that whole experience for me led me to understand this thing called socio-technical systems, right? You can have technology which might address one problem that is perceived by the engineers who built it, but if it doesn't connect on the human level, then you're missing out on the whole point of the system in the first place. Technology is a tool. It exists to solve social problems, make things easier for each and every one of us. So I moved on to BitPay in 2013 once I became the crazy uncle, trying to convince everybody in my family that Bitcoin was the future, and every business I talked to, I was like, all right, well, I'm not coming back here unless you guys accept Bitcoin. So I really was a crazy uncle for a while, running around North Carolina. It was a lot of fun, but man, it was tough to really sell the argument. It hadn't quite been formulated even in my own head yet. But I got reached out to by BitPay. Some of you guys may be familiar with them. They're a payment processor, still active in the space, one of the first businesses in the space. At the time, they were very well invested in open source as the sort of rising tide lifts all boats strategy, right? This is this idea that if you invest in open source ultimately can help more and more people out rather than having different products that compete on X, Y, or Z. Why not all contribute to the same code base so that everybody can benefit from those investments that are going in? So we pushed a couple of cool projects. In fact, ChainDB, something that I don't think received enough attention at the time, was one of the first sidechain implementations. We had Impulse, which is sort of a precursor to the Lightning Network. In fact, Jeff Garzik, the gentleman who I believe was going to speak, he was actually a co-author with me on the Impulse paper, and this is just before the Lightning Network kind of came out. We also worked on something called Foxtrot, which was a peer-to-peer messaging protocol. I will say it's kind of a precursor to what I'm going to talk about at Fabric. So that was a really interesting period of time where I got to see how difficult it was to convince businesses that rather than accepting this tried, trusted, and true green paper state script, that they could accept this digital currency. It just didn't make any sense to them. So we had to formulate that argument. We did end up getting, I think, about 150,000 businesses worldwide that would accept it, but so few of them would actually hold on to the currency. And this is where I start talking about that social aspect. is a sound money. What is a good money? A good money has a certain number of properties, right? It has, it's fungible, number one. You can't distinguish necessarily between one unit of the currency and another. It's secure. It doesn't lose value over time, right? It's something you can keep your savings in. There's all these lists of properties that a sound money has. But for whatever reason, these businesses just really trusted that greenback dollar more than they trusted thermodynamic security. So I spent, after I left BitPay, a little bit disenfranchised. I felt that they were pulling back from investing in open source, and that was really my shtick. I really like to work on technology that's open and available for everybody to see how it works. I spent that summer in 2015 thinking about this thing called Fabric. How do we, Bitcoin seems like it solves the money problem, where we no longer have, there's no longer a central point of failure which can be assaulted or taken over as a vulnerability. But rather, but now how do we do something with it, right? So how do we build applications in much the same way? How do we build services? How do we build businesses on top of this system if what we have is a base layer that's very focused on being a money? I'll save my, I got invited to work at Blockstream, where I kind of sat on the idea for about 2 years and dealt with some really interesting political debates or attacks, depending on what you want to perceive them to be. But ultimately I said, you know what, I think it's time, and this is in 2017, I think it's time to actually show how products can be built on top of Bitcoin. So I started Fabric Labs. But let's talk about this though for a second, because this is really the feelings that I was getting, back in 2011 when I was, looking at Occupy and, starting to really reread that Bitcoin white paper. It's like, man, these trusted institutions that, we all kind of, well, a lot of us grew up kind of expecting, somebody to be there in the case as like a safety net of some sort. It's supposed to be the law enforcement, the people enforcing justice and, keeping things in order for civilization. But that's really not what we ended up with, is it? So the castle is burning, and that's really the best way that I can think about it. You have all of these widely disparate groups, some fighting each other, but a lot of it has lost the greater idea of supporting people through the social aspect of things. So I am going to talk, like I said, a little bit technically, but this is straight out of the white paper. What is Bitcoin? Why does it exist? This is literally the first sentence in the Bitcoin abstract. You'll see it's peer-to-peer, strictly peer-to-peer. Without going through a financial institution is another thing that this thing says, right? Disintermediating, removing these third parties from what should be otherwise a perfectly mutual, voluntarist, peer-to-peer trade. If I'm participating in business with someone, frankly, it's nobody else's business what we're doing in our business, right? If I'm buying something from you, that's our business. So Bitcoin really strikes at that heart. It really, in the very first sentence of the white paper, it really makes a statement about what it's about. And there's a lot of other things in the white paper, but I really do think that it deserves a read. No matter how technical you are or non-technical or whatever it may be, it's short. I think it's like 8 pages. And it describes things in a really clear and concise language, far better than I think I could probably ever do. But how does Bitcoin work? All right, so I'm just going to gloss over this really quickly. I think we all kind of have a good idea about cryptographic signatures and the fact that they can prove with mathematical certainty that you've had a piece of information at a particular point in time. Bitcoin, in this case, these public keys are used. But what we can do is actually, instead of a public key, we can write a small program, right? This is actually referred to as that phrase smart contracting, that coined by Nick Szabo, actually in the early 2000s, may even have been late 90s, is how far back these ideas really go. So when you have the ability to actually lock up this money and have an encumbrance on it, or some sort of a program that has to be executed, there are really incredible, complex behaviors that you can compose with this. You can think about these as little micro tools. Tools that, when used appropriately in combination with one another, can create, even though they're simple in and of themselves, they can create very complex systems and very predictable systems that don't lose anybody else's money. And this is in very different contrast to a lot of the ways that some of the other newer blockchains have approached, and I'll get to that here in a minute. So what is a transaction? It has a list of inputs, right? This is inputs in a Bitcoin transaction are references to previous payments that have been spent, right, or accumulated. It has a list of outputs, which is who now owns it, which can then be spent later. So an output becomes an input in a future transaction, right? And then we have the encumbrance, and this is that smart contract component that I'm talking about. Okay. What am I talking about when I say sound money? What is this sound money hypothesis, right? I will say that probably the biggest, most informative group of people that was helpful to my thinking about this was the Nakamoto Institute. These are some of the very earliest first generation Bitcoiners that really, before even any of this blockchain stuff kind of took off, it was the Nakamoto Institute, people who were really taking every word that Satoshi had said, thinking about it carefully and relating it to existing monetary ideas, Austrian economics, lots of different components, right? But the general idea, and this is my words, is that markets tend to converge, right, towards an efficient system. Because, it's not, if I'm, wanting to do business, I don't want to use a different currency for every different business that I transact with, right? I want something convenient. I want something useful. That's really what money is about. All of the properties that a good money has, all the fungibility, divisibility, and durability, and so on, all of those properties really are in service of that social aspect that I'm talking about. So this is one of those driving forces that ultimately led to this idea called hyper-Bitcoinization. I think originally coined by Daniel Krawitz at the Nakamoto Institute. So please do go read that for more of a point. But I think that really is the reason. It's not for me that it's like one token versus another. It's not one blockchain versus another. For me, it's a movement. It's an overarching movement. We all have a very common enemy here. And it's those trusted, centralized institutions that have failed us, across the board have failed us through and through. But if we can think about this for a second, and we can have a money that isn't coupled to those centralized institutions. I mean, it seems so obvious now, in retrospect, 10 years later after the white paper, but sound money, this idea of having a independent money that nobody has the ability to manipulate or control, that is really what I see as forming the foundation for what could be one of the first truly free markets, one that is unconstrained by government restrictions and regulations. So let's talk about Bitcoin. I mean, how did we where are we? Why did we hear all of these crazy debates over the past several years? What is Bitcoin, and why is it doing things the way that it does? Really quickly, I think it's slow and steady wins the race. When you're dealing with somebody else's money and you're writing code that deals with somebody else's money, you have a moral imperative to make sure that code doesn't lose that other person's money, right? So I think slow and steady is really the only way that we can move this thing forward. Unfortunately, that means that for some people who want to take things really fast and treat it like a startup, which is typically the ideal of going fast and breaking things, yeah, I would love it to go faster. I would absolutely love it to go faster, but man, the education process is so slow. It's so difficult because these concepts are so deeply embedded, not only in our psyches, but deeply embedded in the way all of society operates right now, right? Everything is tied to that dollar. Everything is tied to that national currency. And when you cross a border, you're transiting into someone else's sovereignty, right? So these are kind of implicitly political ideas that we got to take it slow. We got to make sure we get it right. So the other thing is reliability and resilience against would-be attackers. So to Bitcoin, one of the most important realizations that I had was that Bitcoin is for my enemies too, right? Like if really, it's true. Bitcoin is something that is for everybody, and it's not useful as a money if it's restricted to any group of people, right? No money is useful. I mean, none of this stuff would be useful. So one of the other core ideas behind Bitcoin's design and how it approaches things is it kind of makes the assumption, you know, in fact, this is the idea of what Byzantine fault tolerance is, right? You know, you don't know if one of the servers in your network or one of the people in your network is just acting foolishly, or the server, for whatever reason, maybe it got hit by a cosmic ray and it's just not executing the code correctly. Or it could very well be an attacker, right? That uncertainty of whether or not it's a fault, like just because of a computer fault, or somebody making a bad decision, or if it's an actual attacker, that is what we call Byzantine, right? That is the definition of the Byzantine general's problems. We don't have a way of distinguishing against that, but we want to design a system that's resilient against both. So that kind of gets me to the third point, which I will say is a core of Bitcoin's design philosophy, which is don't trust, right? Verify, right? We have the ability, the math now, because we don't have to trust anything that somebody says. We can actually just look at the mathematical signature that is produced when an individual signs a transaction. And like we said before, a Bitcoin transaction, if I'm paying someone, for example, I'm going to pay for one of these books out here, that's a contract. I have committed this payment to you, and I'm signing that contract. It's a very simple smart contract, but it can be composed at much higher orders if we just follow this basic principle. Don't trust on the word, trust on the signature, trust in the math. Always verify. So how do we contrast it? And I don't want to pick on anybody in particular here because I think everybody is making a good faith effort to design a system which serves the wider needs. There are differing technical opinions about the architectural design decisions that are made in these things. But since Ethereum does happen to be one of the very first and primary competitors to Bitcoin at this point, it's really easy. And a lot of the other chains have started to copy Ethereum. So if you start seeing like third generation blockchains, as I heard some of the names mentioned around here, a lot of them kind of follow the Ethereum model. And I think this is because what they're looking for is ease of development, right? It seems a lot easier to develop on Solidity because it's a lot more of a user-friendly programming language than Script. But that's a double-edged sword, right? You know, if something is easy, then it's going to be really easy to also write code that has bugs in it. And as an engineer, personally, I would prefer a system that it's not possible to have a bug which loses somebody money. And we can design systems that do this. But just some contrasting points here. I know we've talked about fixed money supply already earlier today versus an unlimited money supply. You can pick your side, pick your argument. Personally, I like the idea of sound money. If I've purchased something, I want to know that the contract of me purchasing it is going to be upheld, right? When I acquired my Bitcoin, I knew that it would only ever be 21 million. So if there was ever a possibility that someone could step in and change that number, Bitcoin would be worthless to me. I mean, to me, because that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for a money that increases in value over time, not one that somebody can arbitrarily change. And I tried to run numbers here on Ethereum. I'm really not trying to pick on them about this policy, but I think this was 2017, the inflation was 14.75%. So that's 14.75% decrease in the purchasing power of the raw currency. And that's what I'm trying to get away from in terms of the US dollar, right? Like I don't want to lose 2% of my value every year just because it's good for the country. It's like, this is if I worked for this is my work, I want to keep my work. So that's my thoughts on that. The other thing I see here is a real big difference on this proof of work versus proof of stake thing. I'm sure this has been a belabored point, but I actually think proof of work is pretty much the only chance that we have of fixing the Earth's energy problem. It will incentivize, it will actually first, it will upset any subsidized energy markets, right? Because the energy markets are going to be imbalanced. The true cost of that energy is actually much higher than what you're actually paying for it. And so those will be the environments where the energy grid starts to get challenged, first and foremost. And those will be the opportunities for new renewable energy to be brought onto the grid. And I think en masse, if we do achieve hyper-Bitcoinization, the vast majority of demand for energy will be this backstop of this underlying sound money, which is used in pretty much all financial transactions, all trade at the end of the day. So I think a vast majority of the waste that goes into, say, running the Federal Reserve, or all the armored trucks that drive around the cash, to the air conditioning of all the banks, to the 800 watts per ATM that's used, it's just an absolutely astronomical energy cost that just people don't have any idea just how big it is. And I think ultimately, just my estimate is that Bitcoin ends up being a cheaper system to run for the same degrees of security. The other thing I want to get into before we get too far is the UTXO model. So I did describe how the Bitcoin transaction works, how that little contract, that little computer program can control whether or not that money can be spent, right? Ethereum kind of took a different approach. They used something called the account-based model. And this leads to a number of different issues, not the least of which for me is a privacy concern. Whereas I can have many UTXOs that are public to the world, the more that I have, in fact, the more difficult it becomes to trace it back to me as an individual. Whereas with Ethereum, everything is kind of, they push you into having one account for all of your financial transactions. And that aggregation to me is a threat to my privacy. So I really prefer that. And that kind of gets to the last point, which is where we lead into Fabric. In Bitcoin, storage in the blockchain is expensive, right? This is a database that's going to be around for 10,000 years, probably more, right? It's probably the only system that could potentially resist an AI takeover, right? Because no matter how powerful, how smart that AI is, as long as it's not breaking the laws of physics, it can't catch up to the mining power of Bitcoin because we've accumulated that thermodynamic security 10 years in advance at this point. So even if some mysterious AI decides to come in and try to control the world economy, it's just not going to be possible because it still cannot break the laws of physics. But the space in the blockchain is expensive because it's a database that's going to be around for a long time. So how do we do this world computer stuff? How do we decentralize all of the different services that are on the internet that we have to trust someone to use today, even if it could otherwise be a peer-to-peer thing? Bitcoin takes the approach of pushing those computations up off of the blockchain and creating alternative systems where only the parties that are interested in those computations have visibility into them. And where it seems like Ethereum, I think Ethereum is making some adaptation here. The ETH 2.0 approach is changing how they do things to follow more closely the off-chain model. But up to date, all of those transactions are stored in the chain. It's that means that every individual across the entire network is running the same computations for all the peer-to-peer trades that are happening out there, right? That means it's an exponential increase in the amount of storage space that you're going to need to keep the records of those computations around. It's also, it's work that, first of all, it's a privacy violation if I'm seeing everybody else's computer code, right? So we got to think about privacy stuff and how do we do zero knowledge circuits, which is kind of what I get into. So this is just how I contrast the two ideas. Again, really not trying to pick on Ethereum. but it's as an engineer, it kind of hard. So let me just tell you about my thoughts on proof of stake here. I'm not anti-proof of stake, actually. This is a common misconception. I think that proof of stake does work in some cases, but you cannot use it to create a currency at the base layer. I think Andrew Poelstra wrote a great essay about this. Please do get this link, because Andrew Poelstra's certainly among the most respected mathematicians, I would say, in the space. He's a major contributor to bullet proofs, if you guys know what that is. Anyways, he makes an argument that because the system is being secured by the same parties who are holding the wealth, that it actually creates a disincentive for the system to be secure. It creates a strong centralization pressure, which is unfortunate. But this was my gut reaction, this number one. Is proof of stake, to me, seems like it rewards people who already have wealth. And that's not exactly what I'm looking for, right? Like I'm fine with people, accumulating wealth. I'm absolutely fine with savings, right? That's something I'm excited about. But proof of stake seems to give people who have more existing wealth more power in the system. What I would like to have is everybody can participate in the system by simply contributing value, right? And that's how you earn the currency. And that's where the proof of work comes from. That's why maybe I should call myself more of a proof of work maximalist then, or a monetary maximalist at the very least. But Bitcoin is really the system that implements all of these ideas the best right now, from my perspective. If another one comes along and it is better than Bitcoin in these properties, I would be happy to switch. But honestly, I haven't seen anything as of yet. Nothing that really piques my interest. It's also proof of stake is also really, really highly experimental. If we go back to that original idea behind Bitcoin, slow and steady wins the race. Most of the technologies that are in use in Bitcoin, and some of the reasons that some technologies could have been used but were not, is because they were so new. In the cryptography space, you don't want to use new cryptography because it hasn't been battle tested in the markets for, by the parties that have the computing power to break it for long periods of time. So you want to use, Bitcoin made some decisions that it used specific cryptographic primitives that were 10, 15, 20 years old, and they still didn't show any signs of having weaknesses. Okay, 20 years of accumulated history on academic peer review seems to indicate these things are secure enough to trust other people's money on it, right? So those are my thoughts on proof of stake. Now, I do think it could work at layer 2. And this means, though, that from my hypothesis, that you would be bonding Bitcoin into these proof of stake contracts. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. You look at the structure of what a corporation is, or any sort of aggregation of groups of individuals coming together. Of course you want them to be able to vote and control and decide what happens with their stake. I think proof of stake makes perfect sense at layer 2, just not layer 1. Okay, I got through this. All right, so what did we end up doing here? So Fabric. If Bitcoin's blockchain is layer 1 as a sound money, it's a base layer that you can have some very simple rules. You know exactly what these rules do. There's no unexpected behaviors. There's no Turing completeness, right? Your every contract, you can look at it, and before you sign it, you know exactly what it's going to do. Turns out you can use that to build instead of waiting around 10 minutes or an hour for every transaction. We've got Lightning at layer 2, uses these constructs to do instantaneous payments. Well, Fabric uses those instantaneous payments to perform what's called zero-knowledge contingent payments for computations. So you can write a program, compile it down to the zero-knowledge circuit in Fabric, distribute that circuit to the network, and then anybody who computes components of that circuit will be able to claim Bitcoin that you paid the network to run. So it's actually like cloud computing, except instead of trusting Amazon, You actually now have a formal proof that your contract runs in a certain way. They have no visibility into how that contract runs because we're using something called homomorphic encryption. And those people will be able to get their payments. Now, I'm running short on time, and I do want to get to some questions here as quickly as possible, but SigHash, anyone can pay. Okay? This is already possible on Bitcoin today. It's been possible since the beginning. This is how you do crowdfunding on Bitcoin. This is a way that you create one of those transactions. It doesn't have any inputs, but it has a certain amount that you're trying to raise, right? You have a certain output size that you're looking to raise. SigHash, anyone can pay, allows you to broadcast that transaction. It's not valid on the chain until enough people add their own inputs that it matches that criteria, and that gets you your crowdfunding. SigHash, no input, similar idea. This is one that allows you to sign a transaction but not provide any inputs. And this is what's really useful for composing things like atomic swaps, doing market orders by broadcasting a transaction in a similar way. We basically say that there's no inputs, but they'll be provided later. Do look this up. There's a really interesting series of controversial discussions about this. Some think it's too powerful because it basically turns Bitcoin into a full-on supercomputer. CheckSig from Stack is very similar. This allows you to actually build contracts in the Bitcoin stack and then run them as if, you know, the core Bitcoin language script supported them. So this is really powerful. Andrew Polstra also has a ton of work on this that I'm going to talk about. What did we build? Please do check this stuff out in your own time. We have built RPG, which is a virtual worlds gaming platform. So this is really taking off, I think, with people under, in the teenage space. Also Southeast Asia right now. We've already got 100,000 users, and we're using a Bitcoin bonded currency. And then what we're launching tomorrow is, we'll be doing this in Silicon Valley, Portal, which is a trustless peer-to-peer atomic swap application. And that's all I've got. Sure, yeah, please, yeah, by all means. I tried to get URLs on here just so that you guys could catch pictures. So.
The last part, can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so Portal. So Portal is a company we partnered with. They're doing a user experience focused decentralized exchange. So using the homomorphic components that I'm talking about, basically you put an order into the system, it goes out into the network. People can't see what that order is. It's like if you guys don't know what a dark pool is, a dark pool is like it allows for more fair pricing because it's like wrapping it in multiple layers so people can't see what the prices are. But if they have an order that matches, it executes. Right? And so the people who help that execution take place get a small payment, and then both parties also get their corresponding trades. So this is going to be announced tomorrow. There's a meetup, Silicon Valley Bitcoin meetup. If you want to go check that out, there will be a live stream. So if you want to see that live event, it'll be up there. So.
Is this based on merge mining? I didn't know what you think about merge mining.
Yeah, merge mining is an opportunity for two different chains to use the same mining resource to secure both chains. We are not using the concept of merge mining. In fact, we don't have we're not a blockchain. We're not building a blockchain. There already is a blockchain. It's the Bitcoin blockchain. Our system is a peer-to-peer network, right? So what we're doing is we're actually just passing transactions across the network. And if the people who can fill them will fill them, and they don't even need to relay them on, which grants our system a lot more efficiency than a blockchain might have. So we don't need merge mining in our aspect. But merge mining is really interesting. I think there are some incentive questions. It is possible for a merge mined sidechain, if it has its own currency, to potentially be a net negative for the main chain, because it has the potential, if it becomes valuable, to draw mining power away from it, right?
Like a parasite.
Yeah, exactly. So I know that there are 2 or 3 production side chains that are now running using merge mining, including RSK, which RSK is another great project, by the way. Rootstock allows you to run the Ethereum virtual machine, but instead of using Ether, it runs on top of Bitcoin. So you can deploy your Solidity contracts directly on top of Bitcoin today if you really want to. So.
Any more questions? Yes, to Murray.
Yeah, so my question is always, typically whenever people debate the proof of stake versus proof of work designs, like you listed out to some of your beliefs about the issue, but one of them being the very first one, it seems to reward existing wealth rather than incentivize contribution. Would you say that's actually more of an execution of how people are designing proof of stake at the moment versus proof of stake of how it can be executed?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think it would be possible to have a proof of stake system that had some sort of degree of fair launch, but unfortunately, just the number of eyeballs that you get when you launch, it's still so small. It's hard to call it a fair launch at any degree, right? So.
But that's marketing and kind of exposure issue versus
Absolutely.
technological.
Yes, correct. That's I like to say socio-technical, right? So it's so important there.
All right, Jared at the back.
Yes, just a comment, or actually a question to you. Do you have any concerns about the perceived concentration of wealth of existing Bitcoin holders, and how do you feel about that security as it relates to a 51% tax?
Absolutely. So I gave a lot of thought about this, right? This really challenged me because, you know, I hadn't fully sussed out my political leanings yet, and it took me some time to really wrap my head around this. Yeah, I mean, when you're launching a new money, right, you know, the early movers are going to have an advantage. And that's a good thing. That's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for you to spread word of mouth and get every single one of the people who are close to you involved as quickly as possible. Be that crazy uncle, you know what I'm saying? And help them ride that rocket ship, right? But, you know, at the end of the day, Bitcoin is not scheduled to be fully deployed until 2140. So, you know, you look at the numbers, wealth does not typically last in history longer than 3 generations, okay? So it's just a fact, right? Like, whatever reason, like, generational wealth just eventually falls out. So I'm not worried about it. I think it's actually an opportunity not only for the people that, you know, probably need it the most to take advantage of it, but I also think that you know, it's the people that are taking advantage of it probably have the deepest seated passions about it, and those are the people who I want to see well capitalized. You know what I'm saying? It's not the bankers, because the bankers are laughing, right? They think it's a joke. Well, most of them at least. Now the smart ones are starting to get into it, but. You see what I'm saying? Like, those are the people I want to be empowered, right? Because I want them to bring their ideas, and I want to bring them capital and apply it. So.
This might be a stupid question, but the RPG thing, did you all build that yourself from scratch? And if so, why wouldn't you want your own altcoin?
Fair enough.
Like, if you have that capacity to build that, then you can remove volatility. There's just a lot more that you can do with that. I was curious as to what your reason was for that.
Absolutely. So, my history is in entrepreneurship, and typically, as an entrepreneur, you want to find a problem that the market has, and then you want to come up with a solution to that problem. When you're launching a product of any sort, it's that you got to find that problem. But if you want to introduce the launching of a new currency to your equation, you now have a second problem, right? And my resources are already strapped enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it looks like Bitcoin's working pretty damn well as a currency. So I'm personally happy to accept Bitcoin deposits because I know that's going to be valuable, right? And then I hold that in our contract, right? And that we have a currency. It's like a Bitcoin-backed currency, right? So if you want to, it's just like the old gold-backed currency used to be, but it's Bitcoin-backed. So we have that currency, and you can speculate on it if you really want to.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it boils down to the Bitcoin that it's backed by.
Understood.
So
Why is ZK Swaps important?
Yes, ma'am.
ZK swaps are important because in order to have fair markets, properly free trade, you need to eliminate the ability for any of the facilitators to front run your orders, right? So right now, today, and there are supposed regulations that are preventing this, traditional exchanges have full visibility into all the orders that are coming in. It takes one shady dude sitting at a desk to like look at that and make a little trade ahead of time. You know what I'm saying? That's the problem. So what we want is we want guaranteed privacy in our trades so that I don't even know who the counterparty is. I don't even know. What I'm doing is I'm setting my fair price and I'm sitting it out on the market. And if somebody else thinks that's a fair price, then they execute it. And that's the Austrian argument, right? For every trade that takes place, both parties are profiting, because otherwise they wouldn't make the trade, right? Like I'm perceiving that I'm profiting because maybe I have more apples than I have oranges, and I'm looking for some oranges. My apples are worth less to me than they're worth to you because you have oranges. See, so that is the Austrian economic argument. And so the more trades we can facilitate and in a way that we can prove that no information is leaking across that market, the closer we can get asymptotically towards a perfectly fair market. And that's what we're looking for.
Thank you. So I'm pretty sure that you hear about new currencies rising up and just coming about that may or may not catch on. And it seems like popularity of a currency that aids in standardization of a currency almost in some ways flies in the face of privacy of transaction. So that being said, I have a question. I'm just curious. Have you ever heard of OWO coin, and what's your opinion of it, if you have?
I haven't heard of it. I'm always happy to look at the technology, how these things are implemented, because that's what it boils down to me. It needs to be implemented in such a way that it is actually secure, not that it just claims to be secure, right? Because if something claims to be secure, I think that's a net negative, right? Because then you're fooling people who don't know any better into adopting it and using it as if it were secret, as if it were a private or whatever it is, right? But if it doesn't have those properties, then you're basically taking money from those people.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, before we hear from our chief guest, let's have our final panel. And the panel will be on the fourth industrial revolution, or is it colonization? That's the question. So, welcome. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists? All right. All right, so we'll begin with a round of introductions, starting with Obi, who will be our moderator. Obi.
Good afternoon. My name is Obi Egbuna Jr. I'm the U.S. correspondent to Zimbabwe's national newspaper and the external relations officer of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association. Based on what was requested of me, I'll be summarizing this panel up.
Hi, my name is Ian Bellina. I'm a blockchain investor. I also create content in the space and also the CEO of Tokenmetrics.com.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gerard Newkirk. I'm the founder and CEO of KWH Coin. We are a renewable energy services platform that focuses on delivering energy as a service for rural, remote, and isolated populations around the world. Gerard Newkirk.
So we can begin. What are your thoughts on the topic? Is the fourth industrial revolution a revolution, or is it colonization 4.0? We start with you, Gerard.
Yes, I think it has an opportunity to be a revolution. I think that we have a merging or a convergence of multiple technologies. Most importantly, that will give us the ability to empower vulnerable populations that haven't had access before. Now, with blockchain technology, for example, there is a choice whether it be used as something more cosmetic as exclusively cryptocurrency, or we dig deeper into applications that will have social impact. But I think that with the fourth industrial revolution, there is an opportunity to build sustainable infrastructure for technology to be used as a liberation or as an empowerment vehicle.
Can you please restate the question again? Sorry.
So the question was, what are your thoughts on the fourth industrial revolution? Is it disruption, a technological disruption, or is it a code word for colonization?
Very good question. I think that's tough to say. I mean, I went to the African Blockchain Conference, and that was also the theme there, right? The theme was how to get African economies in the next revolution, right? We all know how blockchain is supposedly one of the biggest innovations since the internet itself, right? But how do we really get African countries a part of that? And one of the things that was asked, and people were kind of asking this as the actual question, right? The African countries or African economies have to adapt, right? It's basically adapt or die, right? They cannot get left behind in this revolution, right? Because the question at that conference was, if African countries or economies don't adapt, they'll end up being what's served for dinner on the table during this revolution, right? And I think that's definitely, I definitely believe that stance. I think it's basically adapt or die, right? This revolution, the blockchain revolution specifically, gives economies all over the world, but more importantly in developing countries, the chance to be part of the next frontier of the global economy, right? Despite the setbacks of where they began, right? For example, being able to, for people in a country, being able to own Bitcoin and not have the volatile local cryptocurrency, the volatile local currency, being able to escape inflation and other risks, being able to have really their own money, their own income, their own part of the global economy, right? So I think the barrier to entry has been shifted, and almost kind of like how the world has gotten flatter, right, from a technological standpoint. I think other countries, for example, Binance launching their first crypto to fiat exchange in Uganda, right? I mean, Binance was traveling all over the world, being kicked out by almost every country, from Japan, China, and the developing countries said, hey, come home, come here, right? So the fact that African countries can be leaders in something like that, right, I think definitely shows that they have a chance to be part of this revolution, right? They just kind of have to be very strategic with it. And I think they have the advantage in the sense that they're more nimble, right? For example, here in the US, right, there's so much red tape to do things, right? But the way things happened with Binance coming to Uganda, CZ was a speaker at the African Blockchain Conference the year before that, right? And the organizer told me they got CZ, because the president of Uganda, Museveni, was there at the conference as well as a speaker. They got the president of Uganda and CZ in the same room, had a meeting. Next thing you know, Binance Fiat Exchange in Uganda, right? So the fact that people who are building the next disruptive ideas have easier access to getting the presidents, politicians, regulators in Africa than maybe in their local country or other parts of the world, I think is definitely an advantage they can leverage, right? And best proven with the Binance coming to Uganda example.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll have to cut you guys short for a few minutes to let the Congresswoman speak. I would like to introduce Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett from the U.S. Virgin Islands to make her remarks because she has another engagement. So beg your pardon. Thank you. A round of applause.
Thank you for your indulgence in allowing me to speak now to you all. Just so you're aware of why I've probably been asked to be here, I am the representative from the U.S. Virgin Islands, but I also sit on the Committee on Agriculture, which actually has within it as a subcommittee commodities and commodities exchange, which are also, we are some of the regulators and authorizers for the industry that you all are discussing right now. There's right now in Congress a bit of discussion between who has authority over which portions, Financial Services Committee, Ways and Means, which is the tax branch of Congress, as well as the Committee on Agriculture. There's quite a bit of overlap, and as we're understanding and as this industry is expanding, we're all trying to stay on top of it. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you all on what I believe is a really important topic and how this emerging technology has the potential to revolutionize the way our global economy works. So I believe it can be a revolutionary mechanism, particularly for people of color. If we're not careful or if we're asleep at the wheel, it will be a colonizer of us in that respect. So that's my response to the question that you asked. I want to give a special thank you to Sinclair Skinner for the invitation to come and speak. Blockchain has garnered attention as a breakthrough technology with the potential to improve how we conduct business. Initially popularized by Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency uses, companies and governments are seeking novel ways to apply the technology to increase global output. But despite public intrigue and excitement about the technology, questions still surround what it is, what it does, and how it can be used, and its trade-offs, and how it might assist in the economic growth and wealth creation of communities and people of color. Congress has taken an interest in blockchain, with several members introducing legislation in support of the technology, and there's actually the formation of a blockchain task force in Congress. Representatives Warren Davidson of Ohio, Tom Emmer of Minnesota, and Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey are three of the task force members. Davidson has twice introduced the Token Taxonomy Act to Congress, which is a bill aimed at exempting cryptocurrencies from securities law and providing digital assets with a clearer legal standing in the United States. Congressman Emmer has also pushed for legislation that would exempt cryptocurrency startups from state-level regulations, allowing them to develop blockchain platforms and services without having to register as a money transmission business in the states they conduct business. For hundreds of years now, communities of color have been kept from profiting from innovation and new technology. The Industrial Revolution, transportation innovations such as steamboats and railroads, and most recently, the Internet. We cannot allow this innovation to not be utilized for our own growth. I truly believe that if this technology is harnessed properly, we, people of color, have the potential to right many of history's wrongs. But how can we use this innovative technology for our communities? For far too long, African Americans have been denied business loans, financing, and other resources due to the color of our skin. Blockchain, in many respects, has the ability to provide anonymous and secure transactional guarantees through a democratized trust that will allow minorities and disenfranchised communities the opportunity to invest and bank without discrimination, thus revolutionizing our communities and spurring minority innovation for self-sustainability. Examples of business owners like Dawn Dixon, who uses her influence to engage with blockchain community, inform people who are interested in the technology, and fundraise for her own company, Popcom, an automated retail technology company. Popcom develops software and Internet of Things connected hardware for self-service retail, including vending machines, digital kiosks used to dispense products and perform transactions. I also believe, and it's my hope in working in Congress, to regulatory opportunities such as sandboxes should be incorporated in this technology. Regulatory sandboxes involve temporary relaxations or adjustments of regulatory requirements to provide a safe space for startups or established companies to test new technology-based financial services in a live environment for a limited time without having to undergo a full authorization and licensing process. It also allows regulators and innovators to work constructively together when the alternative would be hostile and stifled innovation. Regulatory sandboxes introduce the potential to change the nature of the relationship between regulators like myself and operators and innovators working in crypto and blockchain industries to support new entrants, to support people of color, to find out where there are blocks and mechanisms that would keep us from entering this field. Representing the Virgin Islands, I see blockchain and sandbox potential game changers for our agricultural sector. I think that's me. Local banks and how resources are distributed. For example, I represent the Virgin Islands. We have tax incentive laws and mechanisms to allow startups, incubator companies, accelerators to be in our space. These are areas where people of color and communities of color can actually create environments for individuals like yourselves and others who are interested in this space to be in communities of color, right? Remain in those communities to use the technology to assist others outside of the community. To be in places like Shaw, to be in places like St. Croix, or be in other countries where they are an influx of people of color, while at the same time advancing global initiatives, I think can be supported by this technology. We need more events, however, like this event here. We need larger blockchain black summits to educate our communities on this emerging technology. Being at Howard University is a great mechanism for doing that. It would be awesome to also have this in our high schools so that our young people can hear about it. In community colleges, where there are young black people who are working and in school at the same time, who really can take hold of this as a means to pay for that education while they're moving forward. There's an old saying that if you want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book. Let's open up the book to a chapter which reads Black Blockchain so that we can educate and motivate the next generation to succeed. I was again fascinated when preparing this speech to learn of all the benefits blockchain can bring to the table, and I remain encouraged that through summits and programs like this, you will be those that take us all and put African Americans on a level playing field, not just in technology, but in economic growth and wealth creation for our next generation. Thank you all so much.
A round of applause. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. All right. Okay, picking up on our conversation, I want to build on Congresswoman's last point of education. Obi, you've been building Pan-African organizations around community organization, I believe focusing on young children. How can we get them ready for the industrial revolution, if it is at all a revolution? What are your thoughts?
First of all, I'm honored to be here, but it's like with anything else, it's a question of narrative. We use the word revolution. Are we sure that's what people want? And the reason that I say that is, and it comes back to definitions. The definition we like to use when engaging our children is the one used by Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. In his book, Conscientism, he says revolution is not only a revolt against an old order, but a contest for a new order. Many people can tell you whether social media is their platform, whether a political campaign is their platform, whether a protest or march is their platform, what they're fighting against. What are they fighting for? I say that because we're going through a process now where those who talk tough about Trump are the same ones who were being bold about Bush, but between 2008 and 2016, I'm speaking specifically about the community I'm a product of, you were either on hibernation or under hypnosis. And I say that to say because when you look at this whole question of wealth, I'll just use, and this will be the last one I use in terms of definitions because all resistance must have direction. Frantz Fanon told us a long time ago that people come to understand that wealth is not the fruit of labor but the result of organized protected robbery. And those who colonized our people and captured our people have to do everything they can to preserve what they have stolen and what they continue to rape and plunder. So anytime that people are talking, and when we have young people talking about the accumulation of wealth, not the accumulation of wealth, but the accumulating wealth, and then the number one objective becomes preserving wealth, what about what Dr. King took a bullet from the FBI and CIA dealing with the redistribution of wealth? So when we come to talk about dealing with this on the front line, dealing with this in the context of struggle, dealing with this in the context of history, what models are we using? We are here 4 days after Africa lost one of its giants, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, former president of the Republic of Zimbabwe. And I was thrilled to know that there was a moment of silence for him yesterday. But at the same time, you were at the Congressional Black Caucus, or they're infused into this process. Every member of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2001 voted in favor of sanctions on Zimbabwe for reclaiming their land from 4,500 Rhodesian British commercial farmers who got it because of colonialism. So how does John Conyers come, look in our face, talk about reparations, and his interpretation of reparations, he has no problem voting in favor of sanctions, seek to stifle a country that is reclaiming what is inherently theirs. So in the context of definitions, in the context of direction, that's the way we look at this.
So speaking about sort of the reparations concept, Ian, we had a great pre-summit discussion. Yes. I would like you to share basically your thoughts. So we rehash them basically.
So, I mean, I'm definitely for the reparations, right? But as, I guess I kind of have a different perspective. As an investor or entrepreneur, I find it very unlikely or improbable that African Americans or black people will get reparations from America, right? Because if it's something that would have happened or was likely to happen, it would have happened a long time ago, right? And I don't like holding or waiting for something, right? I kind of like to take things into my own hands, take action myself, right? So rather than waiting for America to ever give reparations, I think we have to really just educate how to build our own wealth, our own income. That's kind of how I built my own channel, right? Initially, it was just educating, and specifically, initially, my audience was targeting minorities, right? Minority men and women, young people, millennials, because I had so many other people say, hey, you're a young brother, very successful, how'd you do it, right? So I launched my channel as a way to kind of give back and share my story, how I did it, right? How I kind of navigated the system, right? And kind of reached to where I was. And then the channel kind of blew up, and then people of other races and other backgrounds joined my channel, right? But initially, it was just educating people around business, finance, and making money, right? And kind of telling my story, right? Because I've been able to become now self-employed, give up a nice job in the corporate world, where even then, right, I was kind of going up against the system in a way, right? I was always kind of fighting just to stay afloat, right? Because it definitely was not easy, right? It definitely was not easy, but I felt like I couldn't really trust the system, I had to find my own way, my own path, right? And it definitely took lots of trials and tribulations and errors and failures. But I think to where I am today, it definitely has been worth it, right? But it kind of came from me not expecting the system, which was not designed to really have me succeed, help me.
All right. So, Gerard, I mean, one of the spaces that black people have not been playing in traditionally is the energy space. And this is something I'm also involved with back home in Kenya. So could you just talk a bit about why there needs to be an energy revolution in Africa, and not just Africa, wherever black people live, the Caribbean where you're from, and so on?
Absolutely, because when we talk about energy revolution, the majority of wealth or the system of colonialism was based on the petroleum dollar, right? It was based on the ability of Anglo-American powers to control the distribution of oil, which is what powered every economy in the world. When I started KWH Coin, the premise of that was we needed to first develop systems to, first of all, use renewable energy. So now you're no longer dependent on foreign oil or petroleum or the petroleum or petrodollar system, and then connect that with technology so that it can be used as a currency. Right now, the dollar is just that. It's not backed by anything. It's essentially backed by the ability of the United States and Anglo-American powers to enforce the petrodollar by force. So conceptually, we designed KWH Coin to focus on areas that were rural, remote Africa, the islands. I'm from Wilmington, North Carolina. There's a very strong, very large rural population there where their energy costs are 40% of their income. So this is the wealth extraction that's happening, and typically energy is the source of that. So in order for us to truly turn and become in a position to develop or to generate wealth, we have to first of all address, acknowledge, and develop solutions that are causing wealth extraction. So that's why Africa, the islands, rural areas are our focus with KWH Coin, and then using cryptocurrency as a liberation technology to connect a currency directly to energy that you can exchange and create value.
All right. Okay. As we close the panel, we'll start with Obi. Give your final remarks, or your final thoughts on the topic.
Well, in terms of all of this, for example, if you're talking about reparations, once again, it's your exposure to it. Are you talking about what the Africans in the Communist Party called for in 1928, where they talked about 5 states in the South, and then that was something that was echoed by the Nation of Islam, then was the foundation for the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, New African People's Organization? And the reason that I say that is because, once again, anything that we deal with, you have to focus on the amputated narrative of the African experience, or the attempt to amputate the narrative of the African experience. So, because remember, you're 18 years removed from the United Nations Conference on Racism, Xenophobia, and Other Related Intolerances. At that conference, the Bush administration did not want reparations to be part of the discussion. That's the same year they imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. And it was in South Africa, and if you know anything about South Africa, you know that till this very day, 83% of the land is still in the hands of those who had it during colonialism. And when you look at Africa in the context of it's from a regional perspective, Northern Africa is the most isolated region because of the Islamic and Arab presence. Western Africa at the governmental level is the most corrupt part of Africa. Eastern Africa is the most chaotic part of Africa. Southern Africa is the most stable. Stable because the political parties who took power through struggle are still in power. And also from an agricultural standpoint, 67% of the workforce in all of Southern Africa, their work is connected to the agroeconomy. At a time where Zimbabwe can humbly let you know that 68% of the agricultural development in that country is being done by women. So when you look at it in the context of, you have to pull Cuba into the equation, because all of the time when we talk about generating wealth, are we connecting it to our resistance? at a time where someone like George Soros can stand before us and claim to be bankrolling all of the genuine efforts that are supposed to represent genuine resistance. How can that be? So he can give Malcolm X grassroots movement hush money. He can give Black Lives Matter hush money. He can give organizations based in the United States hush money, and at the same time be financing 300 civil society groups in Zimbabwe to overthrow the government of Zimbabwe. You talk about America. What is your definition of America? What gave the Democrats and Republicans the right to claim that they are America? And when you look at that, and when you talk about reparations, how does Raul Castro telling Barack Obama on his high-profile field trip where he claimed he was going there to loosen the blockade? Imagine the neck of a lynching victim being loosened. Imagine the handcuffs fascist police put around the wrist of our children being loosened. So how do you loosen a blockade? But that being said, that was nothing but the follow-up of Ted Turner telling Bill Clinton, General Electric telling Bill Clinton 20 years ago, the economic advantages of loosening the blockade on Cuba. And then if you want to take it back to Zimbabwe, someone like Jimmy Carter running around parading to be the savior of the Palestinian people, but as a result of the money from the man who owns Virgin Airlines, who's trying to bring about regime change in Zimbabwe. Or you have the Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds company still scheming to take over the tobacco industry in Zimbabwe. So it's very important that people who are looking for business opportunities, investment opportunities, understand the role of solidarity in this process so you make sure that your money does not become blood money. Lastly, in relationship to that, we talk about this as Africans at a time where 4 children die every hour on the African continent, and we have 15 people who are billionaires. At a time where our young people think being a mascot of a Fortune 500 company has anything to do with self-determination. So when you see these things going on, I remember being in Zimbabwe and riding in a Kombi, the equivalent of the old 1987 Toyota minivans. And they were saying to me, they heard my accent, so they said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Nigeria," because on my father's side, that's where I'm from. And they said, "Were you here with Ali Dangote, the richest African on the continent of Africa?" I said, "I have nothing to do with him." And they said, "So what are you here doing?" I said, "I'm in the information business." And they were like, investment. I said, "No, I'm involved in the type of information that makes it possible for someone like Dangote to feel comfortable coming to Zimbabwe when the United States tells them not to come, when Britain tells them not to come, when the Corporate Council on Africa tells them not to come." That's what we're dealing with here. So and at a time where you saw the cyclone in southern Africa in April earlier this year, and it lets you know that the United States Agency for International Development is more dangerous today than the CIA was at the height of the Cold War because they use bribery against African governments. And there's no reason why we can't pool our wealth to deal with the humanitarian problems Africa had. I close with a recommended solution, a recommended project. I said I'm the External Relations Officer of the Zimbabwe-Cuba Friendship Association. 18 years ago, Kofi Annan, when he was the Secretary General of the United Nations, he called the late Comandante Fidel Castro, who, when you use America correctly, should be our favorite American president. Match up Roosevelt, Obama, Carter, your favorite liberals to him, they'll never measure up. But besides that, no, real quickly, he said that if the resources were ever available, Cuba would send 4,000 HIV/AIDS doctors to the African continent, and they would remain in Africa until the HIV/AIDS crisis in Africa was eradicated. You saw them in the Bahamas. Why can't we finance Cuba's medical efforts in the Caribbean and Africa to show our appreciation for our people there? That's what, so I would say in terms of looking at how we pool our wealth, ensuring that it complements the most genuine resistance efforts we have to offer, that's the direction we need to be moving in. And if you feel that I'm speaking a foreign language to you based on the theme of that, you can blame that on Sinclair for making the theme reparations and revolution. Thank you very much.
All right. Ian?
It's tough to follow that. I mean, I guess I could add, my middle name is Mugabe. right? But yeah, I think he's
Is it for you, Mugabe?
yeah, for real. Well, the actual way is Mugabe, is how it's said, Mugabe.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
I'm lost too, bro. But I think reducing everything to its essence is which is what I like to do. The solution, and I kind of disagree with the sentiment earlier, the solution is decentralized. For example, we're working on a project in Sierra Leone where 80% of the population is off grid. So if you have your house, a solar panel, our software, now you're empowered. You no longer need reparations. So I think we need to reduce those things to its essence, because staying in the bureaucratic structure is not going to foment a solution. I think our solutions are going to be more localized, and I think it's going to be driven by community efforts.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. So I think to kind of share my take on things or recap, I don't think the system is really designed, and at least my perspective is I don't think the system is designed to help me, right? So I don't trust the system. I always know that I have to take things into my own hands. And that's why when I was even working in IBM or in the system, I knew that I had to really break away and become self-sufficient, right? And that's really what kind of my entire journey has been about, is becoming self-sufficient, self-employed, my own businesses, being an entrepreneur. Because I know the system, from whether colonialism, racism, what have you, it's not designed to have me at the top for long periods of time, right?
And we can't, and real quickly, just dealing with neo-colonialism. For example, this is the year of return. And Akufo-Addo is getting red carpet treatment in the diaspora. He is carrying out the agenda of the U.S. Africa Business Center, which is part of the Chamber of Commerce. They love us so much in Africa, they've now adopted an area. And he's benefiting from the work of others who he's in diametrical opposition to. He came out the womb a reactionary.
Finish the point, Obi. Finish the
No,
point.
that's my point, though. So my thing is, and so if Africans born in the diaspora are now going to go to Africa, and your communication with Africans on the continent are going to be in these following prepositions: cook my food, clean my toilet, drive me around. Who the hell is embracing of something like that and can look at themselves in the mirror and claim to be proud to be African?
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I will just allow 2 questions. One from Zé, please. Yeah.
Greetings. Greetings. I'm hearing something about reparations. I heard the macro of internal reparations. When are we going to deal with a systematics, with a system? It appears to me that Bitcoin is more in reference to internal reparations, because if you plant a seed, you can go out and harvest that seed. You don't expect Cargill or Monsanto. Internal reparations. Why is there so much talk on external reparations when you want something done, you have to have a systematic inside? Let's put on hold external reparations, and let's work furiously with internal reparations, and the internal reparations that does not separate you from the African personality that is in a modern context and for the future.
All right. I'm sorry, we have to close it up. So a round of applause for this.
Thank you.
All right.
You got a card? Use the mouse?
All right. So we are right at the close. Thank you all for being very patient. Our final keynote comes from a distinguished professor, Professor Derek Hamilton, and he'll be speaking on addressing governance and accountability through blockchain from his experience in looking at wealth gaps in the United States and beyond. Karibu.
Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction. It is a pleasure to be here at the second annual Black Blockchain Summit. And thank you very much. So I'm going to frame my comments today in political economy, and the role that public power can have in offering empowerment to compete with rhetoric around the value of the market and neoliberalism and just simply laissez-faire economics. All right, so let me get into it. Conventional wisdom holds that education is presumed to be this great equalizer for economic attainment and social mobility, yet when it comes to wealth, employment, and health status, racial disparity not only persists, it often worsens with higher levels of educational attainment, including a college degree. This disparity is rooted by design and implementation. It's rooted in a long history of state-sanctioned, exploitive, extractive, and a discriminatory context that has imposed intergenerational economic, physical, and mental harm on black people, while at the same time advantaging white people with an asset foundation and a legal context that further facilitates the exploitation of black people. Let's begin with wealth. In terms of economic security, wealth is both the beginning and the end. It is the paramount indicator of well-being and social mobility. It provides financial agency. It provides economic security to take risk, to shield against loss. When it comes to economic security, like I said, you begin with wealth and you end with wealth. Wealthier families are better positioned to finance an elite education, access capital to start a business, finance an expensive medical procedure, reside in higher amenity neighborhoods. In the US, the top 10% of households hold nearly 80% of the nation's wealth, and more specifically, the top 1/10%, not even 1%, the top 1/10%, those that earn above $1.5 million a year, they own as much of the nation's wealth as the bottom 90%. Moreover, the bottom 50% of earners own about 1% of the nation's wealth. Still, race becomes a stronger predictor of wealth than class itself. The typical black family has about $17,500 in wealth, and that's inclusive of home ownership. That's nearly $150,000 less than the typical white family, which has about $171,000 in net worth. This obscene concentration and its accompanying plutocracy, where plutocracy is not only being wealthy, it's being able to control the rules that determine social mobility and distribution in general, the likes of which we have not seen since the Great Depression, is driven by a class of white billionaires. Nonetheless, racial wealth gap, where the typical black family has about 10 cents for every dollar the typical white family, is equally obscene, and it itself is a measure of the nation's racist past. It is an inheritance that began with chattel slavery, when blacks were literally the capital assets of a white landowning plantation class. The iterative nature of wealth and higher education should also be noted. Families with financial advantage buy crucial additional advantages for their children, such as the ability to obtain a college degree without accruing the costly educational debt. Lack of wealth, primarily inherited wealth, prevents many black families from accessing this advantage and contributing to an ever-increasing distance between those born with resources and those born without. In terms of employment, I'm actually going to skip a little bit, and I see, so we can get to Q&A, because there might be a good conversation with some of these ideas that I'm bringing up. We have an emerging consensus in America and elsewhere in the world that the free market and the neoliberal approach, which emphasizes deregulation, tax cuts, and tax incentives as a method to cajole or bribe a record profit-earning private sector to provide more jobs and rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure. This is all done under the lure that this will deliver an innovative, dynamic economy that will trickle down to all of us. Instead, what we got over the last 45 years is wage stagnation and concentration of wealth at the top. This approach also frames poverty and inequality as deficiencies internal to the poor and blacks themselves. Stigmatization based on race and anti-blackness is strategically used as political fodder to implement harsh and punitive control on an underclass. In America, blacks become the symbolism by which we define a surplus population. They're characterized as persistently unemployed and unemployable, a source of urban crime and malice, and whose subsistent needs is deemed a fiscal drain on budgets. This fuels the rationale for austerity policies. If behavioral modification, particularly with regards to personal and human capital investments, if that's the central issue, why should we fund government agencies and programs which at best misallocate resources to irresponsible individuals and at worst create further dependencies to fuel more irresponsible behavior? As a result, we end up with state interventions and public-private partnerships that attempt to leverage private and charitable resources to manage or incentivize so-called defective black people, black and brown people, to get an education and be more employable, rather than addressing the resource deprivation and the discriminatory education, health, and labor market conditions in which they face. The market is situated as a natural, great, efficient, self-regulating, colorblind, inevitable arbiter of our worth. It's situated as the solution to all our problems, whether they're economic or otherwise. The most astute, the most valued, the hardest workers, they're believed to prosper and endure, while the least astute, the laziest, in other words, the unvirtuous, the undeserving, caricatured as welfare queens and deadbeat dads, they're presumed to receive their just rewards and simply fade away or have to do something else over time. My discipline, economics, is largely responsible for perpetuating the narratives of the market. I think part of the problem is we have an ahistoric view of issues. Fortunately, we have a historian in the room, a professor at Howard University, Nikki Taylor, and she's demonstrated in her work some of these legacies of the past that have impacts of today. So these presumptions of the market, they pay little attention to the roles of power and initial endowment or capital, and how power and capital can adjust and alter the rules and structure of transactions, in other words, markets, so as to privilege that power and capital in the first place. In other words, power determines the rules of the games. Power and capital are self-reinforcing, and without government intervention, they generate an iterative cycle of both stratification and inequality. Without capital, inequality is locked in. We use words like choice, freedom, to describe the benefits of the market, but choice is an illusion. It is an illusion if an individual lacks basic needs like a job, adequate income, shelter, food, or health care. It is literally wealth that gives you choice, freedom, and optionality. In essence, and also it is important to know that it is wealth that begets more wealth. But to fully understand the free market revolution and how the status quo of America's iterative cycle of concentrated economic and political power, how that can persist, one would have to embrace a third pillar in this relationship, and that third pillar is race. Or more broadly, the existence of a permanent underclass marked by a subaltern identity by which a dominant identity group maintains this status quo, and they're willing to maintain this status quo by sacrificing vertical positioning in exchange for horizontal positioning and status. So in other words, how do you get a white population to go along with an ever-increasingly unequal America? You offer them horizontal positioning. You say, however bad your lot in life may be, at least you're not black. For instance, our long trend towards inequality is not without tension. In the 2016 presidential election, it seems to represent at least a partial rebellion to our status quo. The election caught political pundits and other people way off guard. If the election were viewed from the perspective of stratification economics or critical race theory, those results would have been less surprising. President Trump's campaign slogan of making America great again and his signal that I am your last chance, that was another one of his stump signals at his speeches, that was done under the overture that the pending demographic shift in which whites will no longer be a numerical majority. That's what codifying the property and rights was all about in a lot of Trump's rhetoric. The fact that blacks who live in a family where the head graduated from college typically have less wealth than whites where the head dropped out of high school, that's an example of a property right in whiteness. The fact that a black expectant mother with a college degree has a greater likelihood of an infant death than a white expectant mother who dropped out of high school, or the fact that a black man with a college degree is 3 times more likely to die from a stroke than a white man who dropped out of high school, those are all indicative of property rights and whiteness. 2 things are unambiguous from racial stratification in America. 1, black workers are made worse off. 2, the capitalist class, which is overwhelmingly white, they're made better off. What is ambiguous is the economic positioning of a white working class. And the reason why it's ambiguous is that, as I talked about, horizontal positioning, white privilege offers both psychological and material benefits. An authentic racial coalition to address the paradigm of growing inequality would necessitate that the white dominant group give up the benefits of white privilege. But this privilege is based on, does it seem dismal that we have no hope? I think not, because this privilege is based on an amoral notion of what benefit means. This is a benefit that's largely predicated on a self-interested, neoliberal, and tribal norms in which accumulation knows no bounds. The good news is that change may be happening now. Younger generations and social movements are beginning to redefine economic good to incorporate things like morality, sustainability, and common humanity. We need bold, transformative race and gender conscious economic rights, an economic bill of rights. There's a set of enabling goods and services that are so critical for individual life, liberty, and self-determination that their quantity, their quality, and access to them should not be vulnerable to the pricing and rationing that comes about from firms simply trying to meet their profit-maximizing fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. We need policies where public options directly compete with and crowd out inferior private options. Private options that do not ensure universal quality and access to health care, housing, schooling, financial services, capital, and the free mobility without the psychological and physical threat of detention or bodily harm at the hands of a state-sanctioned terror because someone's social identity is linked to a vulnerable or stigmatized group. So rather than a tax cut that we just passed, which imposes pressure on state and localities to rely on fines and fees to balance local budgets, the federal government should be looking to end mass incarceration, especially of nonviolent offenders, and hold police criminally and civilly responsible for their abusive practices. And rather than cajoling or bribing an already record-earning profit sector with more tax incentives, the federal government should be looking to initiate the economic right to a productive and quality job with economic security, with a living wage, and with worker amenities that provide an investment in our public physical and human infrastructure. To address wealth, I've talked about baby bonds. This would establish a universal birthright to capital, a privilege generally reserved only for those born into wealth. Wealth building should not be the exclusive domain of the wealthy. Baby bonds would provide all Americans with a capital foundation to build wealth and asset securities. The accounts of the programs would complement an economic right to old age pension and provide a more comprehensive Social Security program designed to provide capital finance from cradle all the way to grave, regardless of one's race and family position in which the child is born. The average accounts would be seeded at around $25,000 and grow upwards to $60,000 for babies born into the poorest families. And they would be used when the child reaches adulthood for some asset-enhancing activity like financing an education without debt, a down payment to purchase a home, or some seed capital to start a business. We also need wealth tax. We need a wealth tax in order to contain the plutocracy and the growing power of an ultra-wealthy American elite class. We need a comprehensive reparations program, beginning with the enactment of a version of H.R. 40, which acknowledges the rights and wrongs of our nation's past. In my 2017 National Economic Association presidential address, I shared a 10-point agenda that could form the basis of a new social contract as a race-conscious economic Bill of Rights. The list that I'm about to describe is not exhaustive, but we prioritize a federal job guarantee and we prioritize baby bonds as economic rights that promote inclusion, equity, and fairness and provide a robust public option for jobs, income, and wealth creation for all Americans. At the top of my list is reparations. It is an ultimate necessity to achieve racial justice. A lot of the programs I talk about achieve economic justice, but if we want to have racial and economic justice, reparations is necessary. Reparations for slavery, sharecropping, white capping, Jim Crow laws, and the state facilitated exclusion of black people from several New Deal and post-war policies that built a white middle class. An honest and sobering confession of our historical sins would counter the neoliberal frame that characterizes black, brown, and poor people in general as undeserving. It would also pave the way for narratives that accurately frame inequality and poverty as grounded in resource deprivation. However, acknowledgement and apology, that would simply be empty without some form of material redress. The remainder of a 10-point plan includes items like federalizing credit scores, a metric so determinant in individual life chances it should not be left to a for-profit sector. Government should be responsible and accountable to how these scores are determined, and it should be transparent with an understandable process of how we determine these scores. Also, I advocate for postal banking to provide banking and lending services, particularly to unprivileged individuals who financially have to rely on exploitive and extractive check cashing institutions and payday lenders for their basic banking needs. The plan calls for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to proactively conduct employment audits to detect racial discrimination and prosecute these discriminating firms. Other priorities include federal subsidies to historically black colleges and universities to the proportional tune of the present value of support reached by other colleges and universities from the 1944 GI Bill, which was on the scale of a Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe. The plan calls for eliminating tracking in grade school and offering a talented and gifted curriculum to all children. I'm happy to see that that's part of the conversation right now in New York City. The plan also calls for single-payer health insurance or Medicare for all, and the end of mass incarceration of nonviolent offenders and holding police criminally and civilly responsible for their abusive practices. The extent of our dramatic inequality in America is at least as much a political problem as it is an economic problem. Our existing tax policies that privilege existing wealth over establishing new wealth, that's a choice. Financial behavior and financial literacy, they're all practically useless if you have no finances to manage in the first place. The bootstrap narrative framed in the politics of personal responsibility, which emphasize things like individual agency, particularly self-investments in education, as the sole pathway for upward mobility, that might literally be bad for black people's health. There are physical and psychological costs of stigma and ironically exerting individual agency in environments that are discriminatory and racially stigmatized, particularly when these black individuals pose a competitive threat to the preferred position of a socially dominant group. Black men and women between the ages of 25 and 64, they have about a 50% greater mortality risk than their white counterparts. But what's even more disheartening, these disparities increase with education. Black men and women with college degrees have a nearly 70% higher mortality compared to similarly educated whites. Indeed, I wonder if our overemphasis on education to promote economic opportunity, is that a political ruse? In other words, is the rhetorical aspiration of equal opportunity largely a mechanism, a tactic, so to speak, to facilitate the hoarding of resources of an elite and upper middle class? Look, before I go on, let me say I'm a university professor and very committed to education. I'm committed to education in it as an outcome in and of itself. We are wealthy enough to provide education at least to the college level to all our citizens as an outcome. What I'm critiquing is our overemphasis on the economic returns to education to address socially established structural hierarchies. Basically, I wonder if the framing of inequality as an opportunity gap, if that serves the purpose of reinforcing market norms that put the onus of inequality on the individual while absolving the state from public responsibility. So in closing, I'm going to encourage all you attendants at the Black Blockchain Summit to reject the empirically unsubstantiated rhetoric that ignorance and so-called grit and personal responsibility, that those are the sources of inequality. And also to reject the resulting neoliberal paternalism that attempts to coerce and incentivize insinuated defective people to behave accordingly and make better decisions. Instead, change the paradigm. Be bold. You don't even have to wait on the federal government. Be local. Go into both progressive and conservative areas and advocate for programs and initiatives that truly empower people with economic security, with dignity, and agency to define and achieve their self-determined goals, and also have a long-term vision. Don't be caught up in the myopic notions of scarcity, that frame which at the outset constrains us from reimagining a society that we both want and that we both deserve. Let our advocacy and scholarship, let it heed the words of the Reverend William Barber and his Poor People's Campaign, where he says, quote, "Economic justice is a moral imperative." That's the mantra and that's the motivation. That's all we need to achieve, to justify the goals that we want to achieve. Thank you.
Do you have any question to Professor Derrick?
In the book by Reginald Lewis, why should the white boys have all the fun? How do you adopt his training, which was from Dunbar to Virginia State, around Wharton to Harvard? How do you adopt his training as being a inspirer and a culture, inspirer to teach the people how to do what he did in the modern context of the Bitcoin movement?
Yeah. So I hear two things that were raised in that question. One was, how do we inspire individuals to be great? And then the other part of the question is related to, and I might be interpreting differently, how do we inspire a racial what is in it for white people to want to be vested in some global uplift? What's in it for them? So the first part, how do we inspire people to be great? You know, I don't know. We try to lead by example. We try to, here's what I think. I think we need to provide, I trust people. I think if people are provided with the resources and not deprived of it, that they will be great. I think, you know, we could talk about the power of role models, the power of mentors, which is much better than role models. It's, you know, we can see people, but if somebody's, the difference between a mentor and a role model is that a mentor is lending themselves and their knowledge in a more direct way and not simply serving by example. So, you know, I trust and aspire people, and what I'm advocating for is a collective political advocacy to seize public power, because we shouldn't concede it. That is our power. To seize public power and use that public power in a way that offers the infrastructure so that people can be great, and I don't have to tell them how to be great. The issue of how we can get a racial coalition, currently as we define economic well-being, we can't. Currently as we define economic well-being, it is ambiguous if it is in the interest of white people, even the white working class, to have a coalition with black working class individuals. The reason why it's ambiguous is because of that thing called white privilege. Now, what we can do is redefine how we determine our economic well-being. And I don't think it's pie in the sky. I don't think it's lofty. In fact, I think we have historical precedent. Many of our great leaders, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they inserted morality into their definitions of well-being. They inserted humanity into their definitions of well-being. And then if we look at our planet, we clearly need to insert sustainability into our well-being. So it is when we are able to shift to a narrative of morality, humanity, and sustainability, I think that's when we start to see a coalition across all people. And that's why I applaud movements like Poor People's Campaign that talk about things like our morality and common humanity.
One more question.
This is I'm cool. All right. In terms of time, so that the fourth industrial revolution. So I just want you to picture this. You have mechanization in that first level, which means that technology allows for people to be able to, whoever's benefiting at that time, to be able to accumulate wealth based off this technology. African descendants have been excluded from that process. Then you've got mass production on the second phase industrial revolution. Black people excluded from that process. And what's happening in that cycle is that every time there's a new technological innovation, then there's more money to be made. And as you get closer to the bottom of the hill, that's whenever the speed is at its fastest for any engine or any ball rolling down the hill. If we're at the bottom of the hill because automation, there's not going to be any jobs after you get past a certain point, which means there's not going to be any opportunity for us to be able to accumulate wealth from an economic cycle that won't be coming at, because we're at the bottom of the hill. We probably have 3 to 5 years to do something that would allow us to be able to extract value from an economy that's very quickly becoming digitized.
Yeah.
And if we don't own the digital infrastructure to be able to extract the value from that economy, then there's not going to be any money left to be able to be made, because all the largest organizations, all the largest businesses own all the patents. The only chance we have is being able to use whether it's blockchain or something. And I really appreciated what the ambassador was saying about the opportunity to be a part of the industrial revolution as it pertains to the continent, because then we can at least try to retract and get back to, okay, what's happening in terms of agriculture there, what's happening in terms of industrial revolution there, because then we could actually be a part of building out the infrastructure. But without infrastructure, then it's just not going to happen. And so my question for you is about time. A lot of the things that you're saying, they make total sense. But time, waiting for a government to move, waiting for a policy to change, how much, what's the, from a solution standpoint, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly not telling anybody to wait. I'm also not telling anybody to feel like I'm not telling anybody to wait. They should be active right now. We are at a pivot point in society where I feel like change can happen and is on the horizon. But I'm also, in the same time, not trying to impose the constraint of time that leads to some unfortunate compromises or that are not useful to our long-term vision. For example, there's conversation in this political season about we got to defeat Trump, we got to defeat Trump. And there's some intention where there might be some willingness to compromise in order to defeat Trump. One, I don't even think that compromise is a winning strategy. But even if it was, I don't think one needs to sacrifice a long-term vision of justice for a short-term compromise of what seemed as some political transaction that will have some reward. That's been a problem. I think for a long time over the last 45 years, people that might have a progressive agenda have been too willing to compromise for short-term, seemingly political gains. So that's one point. But I see that my time's almost up, but you asked, I want to respond to like 4 parts of your question. Okay. I think the point you make that is salient is that this is not really new, a new industrial revolution, that we have historical precedent. And from that historical precedent, we know what happened. We know that technology in the past has been not used to empower black people, but rather exploit and extract from black people. Now, here's where we are. We're at a moment where we're trying to think of this new technological revolution and mechanize it as a way of empowerment. And that's part of what's going on at this conference. I imagine that that's what this conference is about. So in order to achieve that, I also need to respond to a couple of things about when you said, should we wait on government and not waiting on government? No, we shouldn't wait on government, but ultimately the role of public power is essential. Here's where a lot of people may disagree with me here in the room. Self-help with regards to collective economics is morally useful, but productively limited. Without resources, it takes resources to generate more resources. And the reality is there's this myth that we have all these resources in the black community. We don't. We do not. When I cite to you those wealth statistics, those statistics are real. Black people we've never had a sufficient middle class if we define it in terms of wealth. We've had educated blacks, we've had blacks with income, but we have not had wealth en masse. We have examples of individuals that are able to accumulate wealth, but en masse there is not a collective wealth. But some good news is that that's not been the history of white people either. That a white asset-based middle class was created. There was not this notion of they pulled themselves up by their bootstrap. It was literally government handouts. We use words like entitlement. We demonize a word like entitlement. But there's nothing wrong with entitlement. That is the purpose of government. Government has a role to promote the social well-being and the social welfare, and that would include black people. So for me, the individual strategies are to collectively organize and demand from your government, and I'm not one that says vote, 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 vote. Vote is crucial and important, so I'm not telling you not to vote, but political strategy is more sophisticated than simply voting, right? So, I guess that's another point. Let me say, the issue of automated jobs, automation going to get rid of jobs. Other lessons from history also is that notion that we're going to not have any more jobs as a result of automation, that's a scare tactic that's been used in the past. Some jobs will go, and some jobs that we can't even imagine will reappear. Work is not going to disappear. Now, if technology facilitates our ability to produce more with less effort, good. But work itself is not going to disappear. In fact, when we start using public power to define work, that's important as well. Maybe we want a 4-day work week. If we have a federal job guarantee that imposes that standard on the market, then that's what we get. But there's value in work, and work is not going to disappear. Now, the automation people will push back on me and saying that, well, what's new now is machine learning. That in the past we've had technological change that have automated some jobs and created new jobs, but what's new now is machine learning. So in truth, that is new. but I'm not caught up in the fear that we're not going to have jobs. And the horizon for automation is also a scare tactic and exaggeration that's not part of reality.
Are you saying meaningful jobs, though, like jobs that actually can pay a living wage and jobs that can actually,
Yeah.
because people are pretty stagnant, in terms of the cost of living going up, and then the actual, the ability to give that. It's a different situation.
Yeah. So I'm certainly not I'm talking about good jobs, good quality jobs. And then another question could be, well, how do we achieve that? So again, I've advocated for a federal job guarantee. Now, the purpose of a federal job guarantee, I'm not talking about workfare or welfare to work. I'm talking about a job that allows people to have a living wage, to have benefits, and that is productive towards improving our physical and human infrastructure. Take care work. Why can't we professionalize all care work, elder care, child care, and provide that as part of our public infrastructure? Clearly, we can walk outside and think of all the work that we need that could be used to benefit our society. We're worried about the environment. Why don't we literally green every home in America? We're worried about geopolitics. The Marshall Plan was probably America's best foreign policy ever. Coming out of World War II, when we put our resources to rebuild Europe, that was probably the most peace-generating policy ever. Why can't we have a Marshall Plan to build up the infrastructure of the world and put Americans to do it? These are choices, right? These are political choices that we can make as a government. And I think we've been caught up in the neoliberal rhetoric around the power of the market so much that we've lost sight of what we can really do with government. Let me say, I definitely see my time ending up, so let me end with pointing out one last thing. Well, actually, two last things. I was at a talk one time, and somebody put up a map, and they drew on the map New York, Washington, D.C., and Silicon Valley. And their argument was human history, economic human history, and recent human history in America was largely driven by Washington, D.C., and New York City, where New York City represented finance, D.C. represented government. The person argued that that's all gone, that it's now Silicon Valley. I say hogwash. Silicon Valley is important. Technology is important. Finance is always going to be king in any economic system, and so is government. That brings us to how decisions and well-being are determined. They're determined by economic power, which is largely finance, and that ain't ever going away. If I got finance, I can buy coders. I could come in and buy up all the innovation that you generate. If I have government, I can structure a political system that allows me to seize or distribute those resources in the ways that I desire. So to think that they ever become irrelevant, that's misthinking. Nonetheless, I'm certainly recognizing the role of technology and engineering. That's relevant too, but we're misthinking if we ever think that political power and economic power aren't relevant. The last part I'll leave you all with is the role of race and stratification and the ways in which you can facilitate this status quo. If America has had a situation where over the last 45 years, despite our increasing productivity, real wages have remained flat, how do you get a political population to go along with that dynamic? As I mentioned, the role of race plays a critical role in allowing that status quo by offering somebody their horizontal positioning. Unfortunately, not only do we care about our vertical positioning in society, we care about our lateral position. We care about how well we are relative to someone else. This is where we also need to change the paradigm. This is where I think, again, when we start focusing on morality and humanity, if we can redefine social norms in terms of those dimensions, that's when the whole system breaks down and we end up with an egalitarian society that's working the way we envision it. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. So we've now reached the end of the summit, and we're going to have a very short award ceremony. I would like to invite Mr. Mapondera up to the stage. Close? Yeah, no, we're giving a close. You? Yeah, very close. Yeah, so you can have it. Yeah. All right. Last year we had a virtual hackathon which involved about 8 startups, and we were able to get a winner for that virtual hackathon, and we'd like to invite them on stage. David, please come on stage and introduce your team. Just take 2 minutes to talk about what you do and how it's related to the Black Blockchain Summit.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I'm David Benjamin, CEO of Bridget. I'm also the Vision Keeper. That's my favorite part of the title. And Bridget is a social overlay that connects people and ideas over the web page. Now, you may be saying, well, what does it mean for something to be over a web page? Well, the web page is created by the web page author, and the web page controls your experience on the page. So if the web page author puts a comment box on the web page, then you can create a comment. If they don't, you can't. At least that's how today's internet is set up. But there is this possibility of creating a new layer on top of the internet. I think of it as an interaction layer. It's actually technically called the annotation layer, and it was in the browsers from the beginning because there was this notion that on the internet, this was in the 1990s, actually even in the late 80s, this notion was that anyone could write or post on the internet, and then anyone else could come and comment on that. This notion of annotations, that's no longer there. We're talking about putting that back in a really powerful way. And the notion is that in the future, the web page, what we think is the end-all, be-all of the experience on the web, is simply the contextual footprint for worlds of information, interactions, transactions, and experiences that emanate from content elements on the page, yet were not created by the page author. So anybody could go to any page. I think of it as like an observation deck. Like right now, we could all be on the same page, the Black Blockchain Summit page, and none of us would know that each other's there at the same time. And I'm saying, let's create this observation deck that if anyone wants to, they can just walk up there and meet whoever else is on that page and have conversations and talk about pieces of text or images or parts of videos. So you can have this incredibly interactive, growing experience on top of a web page that if we set it up right and we build in privacy, we build in security, we build in extensibility, we can have the possibility of trust, collaboration and new levels, collective intelligence, new jobs, knowledge work. It becomes the data that could actually allow us to have what we call ubiquitous context, which is this notion that no matter where you are, whether you're online, in a digital world, or in the real world, you should have access to deep layers of context. No matter where you're focusing your attention, whatever the palette is, whether it's the screen or the real world, as you move your attention, if there's something near it, it lights up, so you know something's there. And if then you rest your attention on it. I'm almost finished.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Yeah. You rest your attention on it, and it brings up all the related information to exactly what you're looking at. And why I think it's really important for this conference and what we're all here is it allows for the possibility of everybody's voice to be brought into the conversation, for us to come together and let steel sharpen steel, and for us to really create the possibility of collective intelligence. I don't see any other way for us to really move forward in a democratic way, be informed, and participate fully.
All right. Congratulations. I'll take this away from you. Great job. I don't know if you want to invite your team members. Are they around?
Jamari, come on up.
All right.
Jamari's our CTO.
All right. So we'll have you as a CEO here next to Mr. Mapondera, and Mr. Mapondera will present the Masai Moran Award. And can we have pictures? And congratulations, Bridget. All right. All right. Thank you, sister. All right, all right. Thank you very much. A round of applause for them. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mapondera. We'll invite you again. So yesterday, Chris and I talked a bit about our incubator. I would like just to give one of our sponsors for the summit and also one of our partners at BitHub Africa, just to take 1 minute to make an announcement. This summit is about taking action, and we've just had a startup that's building a great tool. So Victor, please take 1 minute.
Thank you very much. That's love, African love. Thank you, sir. So, one of the biggest problem Africa has, it's not poverty, it's not lack, it's not anything. I was sharing with a couple of people. The biggest problem Africa has got is unity, really. If you look at everything, it's bordered around unity. It's the ability for people to come together and do something successfully. I mean, even among siblings in Africa, because of the way things are, and probably you hear from most of the speaking engagements we've had here, today. Based on that as well, we cannot actually have a movement without having a move. Something has to happen. And owing to this, BitHub Africa and Cubitex has decided officially and formally to come together to do a move to actually bring what they're doing, what we're doing, and also using that as a statement to everyone to come together. And we are building the Melanin Academy together. Details of this will come up to, as we go on. Over the years, for almost, Cubitex has been around for more than 2 years, even with some of our partners, and we've observed that for us to actually move to the next level, for us to actually be economically empowered, we've left the stage of just a project to now seeing how we could actually have the resources and economy like the professor just finished talking about. So we hope to bring in Africans and prepare them for the next steps. So there'll be an incubator, there'll be training, and obviously there'll be an academy to prepare people. So that fear about what will people do, we are doing something about it. We are working at it. And the right discussions are taking place, not just discussions on paper, but actual real-life discussions in Africa, by Africans, for Africa, and that will serve the globe. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. Shout out to all other incubators in the room as well, and we welcome you to partner with us. All right. So I'll hand over the microphone to Professor Todd Shan, our host, to make his closing remarks and invite Mr. Mapondera. Thank you.
So on behalf of faculty and students of Howard University, first I want to thank BitHub Africa, Bill Murray, for hosting this summit at Howard University. I want to thank you for attending this summit at Howard University. Out there, I want to thank the students for all that they've done. And the takeaway from this is that Howard University is here to serve as a prototyper, as a developer, as a proof of concept venue. And so we posted the business school faculty who's interested in those things. I'm available. I'm in the computer science or the engineering school. I'm available. So with that, we hope that this is just the beginning of your relationship with Howard University and the summit. Look forward to seeing you next year and look forward to working with you on some exciting things as we say it's either colonization or revolution. I think we're going to try to make it a revolution. So that's our goal, revolution. Mr. McIntyre.
Anyway, thank you so much. Like my partner says, I'm the elder of the company. I'm co-founder for BitMari or Bill Murray has been said before. I just want to recap on what this was all about. First of all, I think you know, I'm a Howard University graduate. I went to graduate school here at School of Engineering so many years ago. So I'm always happy to be coming back to Howard, as much as I live here in Washington, D.C. as well. You can be rest assured that every year we'll come here to do this function at Howard University. So that is reassuring. Right, thank you. There are a few things that I think have come out of this organization or this meeting. First and foremost, it's very rare that you see black people of this intellectual capacity in one place and acknowledge that we are probably one of the smartest groups of black people, not only in USA, but all over the world. But we just don't acknowledge it. But I can say from experience, I've never been in any situation where I've had an experience with people of your caliber. Okay, I think that's something that we must be able to pass on from generation to generation. Then two, as black people, we don't really want to acknowledge our intelligence, our capacity to change the world. Okay? We've been talking about my late president, Robert Mugabe. He did the one thing that no black person has ever done and will ever be allowed to do so. And that is to take your land back from a white man and bring it back to your own people. That's why you've got the situation you have in Venezuela today, in Colombia, in Nicaragua, and so forth. In Cuba, these are people who have wanted to take and have control of their resources. We as black people, particularly those in the diaspora, we may not have the physical control of the land that we are at, but we have got the physical control of the intellectual capacity we have. Okay? And in my experiences, both when I was at Howard, during the Black Power movement, and today, okay, the thing that we have been struggling for way back then was that linkage between the African American community or the African diaspora and Africa. Over here, you see that we think in a minority mentality. Oh, we're a minority here, what can we do, and so forth. But if we put ourselves into the larger context of 1.3 billion people, when we add the diaspora, we become about 1.5 billion people, which means black people collectively were the largest ethnic or racial group on earth. So if we define whatever we do in the context of the majority that we have, then I think we have to remove this minority complex that we have. Okay? The white people behave because they think they're the majority and they think they've got the power and the right to dictate what each and everyone must do. Okay? I know it's going to take a long time. I may say this, but I don't expect you to start thinking like a majority tomorrow. It's a process. Okay? So I think that is one of the things that I think when we live here, we'll start thinking about it. What the ambassador was saying, basically, it's basically the same thing. Okay? The Africa trade agreement that we have is going to make it one of the largest trading agreements in the world. We are looking about $3-4 trillion on the African continent that we are capable of doing. So you yourselves here must also see how do you fit into it. Okay? Like somebody says, at times we are busy fighting for crumbs because we are looking at things underneath the table. We're not bringing ourselves to the top of the table where we can decide which part of the steak you want or which vegetable you want on your plate. Okay? So I think hopefully these are some things that have come out of this conference, that next year hopefully we'll have more people from the continent as well. There's a lot that is going on in Africa. One of the things that, just a very small secret I can tell you, which right now, because most of the technical schools in this country, they don't have enough local black students to go there. Okay? So what do? They come to Africa and get the best of our best young people to come. You go to Harvard, MIT, Caltech, Georgia Tech, any major technological university in the USA. The majority of black people you see there are African students. Okay? Yes. My son went to RIP, that is Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Coming from Africa, he was probably one of 2 black kids in the engineering school. The majority of the black students were in arts and so forth in the subject they thought were easy to do. Okay? So Harvard, all these major schools, they go to places like Zimbabwe, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and so forth, recruiting black students to fit what their shortcomings are in the USA. But also at the same time, they want to increase the intellectual genetic pool, if I can say so, by bringing in people of different experiences. I did electricity in high school when I didn't have electricity at my own home. You can imagine how I'm trying to conceptualize. How does this thing work? And someone is showing me an what did you say in electricity? The 3? Now, that was very, very difficult for us to do. Okay? Now, my son, when he came, he was dealing with the kids who started using computers when they were probably 6 years old. He only started using a computer and had his own computer a year before he went to RPI. So, because of these kinds of experiences, all these white institutions, they bring us as African students. How do you transform someone who has not been exposed to technology? How do they adapt to technology and lead in technology? Okay, so these are just some certain dynamics, that at times, as local black students, we don't know this is what is happening. And then as we come here also as foreigners, we also don't know what situations you guys are also faced with. So I think this kind of movement or situation helps us to create that dialogue so that there can be interaction between us and yourselves. Now, let me just close. In Africa, when we started out, we asked the lady to come and do libations so that our conference can go smoothly. I'm sure we can all testify that the last 2 days have been without any conflict. They just went on smoothly. Okay? I want to believe what this lady did for us yesterday is what guided us to be where we are today. No crazy guy came in with a gun and said, oh, there's a bunch of black folks meeting over there, let me take my gun and go and mow them out. Okay? I think the spirits protected us from all that. Now, we're going to ask the spirits to help us to go back home, wherever we live, without any incidents, that they guide us, so that whatever knowledge we have got here, we can also impart it to others. So I'm going to say it in Shona, but this is what I'm going to be saying, that you, our ancestors, please pass our knowledge and bequest to those above you until we get to the Creator, so that nothing should come in our way as we get home. And nothing should happen to our families whilst we are out here. Okay, so I'll say it in Shona, but that's what I'm going to be saying. Wakuru. Munono sisa kuna baba, nekumadzisa teguru. Kuti vana ngavafambe zvakanaka. Vashaye kuro wane dzimotokari. Nematsotsi. Vachipuwana mhuri dzavo dzakanaka. Tazvisiya pamuri. Kuti kunamirai tatenda. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.